Sophie had quit smoking many years ago, but recently picked up the bad habit again. There was no other way, the pressure was too high and she needed relief. She sat by the hospital flower bed, took out a cigarette from her pocket, took a few puffs, then her phone rang. "Leo, what is it?" She blew out the smoke and asked. "Where are you?" "I need to go to the toilet, I just tried to get off the bed myself, it hurts a bit." Leo's voice was hoarse and sounded very pitiful. "Hang on, I'll be right back," said Sophie. She hung up the phone, sighed, hopped down from the flower bed, extinguished the cigarette on the cement brick, straightened her clothes, and headed for the inpatient department. Upon arriving at the ward, she saw Leo had already moved half of his body off the bed, grimacing with a look of pain. Standing at the door of the ward, seeing this scene, her heart missed a beat. Sophie had never seen Leo such a mess. His hair messy and gray, his face pale, with a spot of age spot even on his temple, the token of old age was so evident. If this was a stranger, she would have called him uncle. On second thought, realizing that this old man was her husband, who would still kiss her, caress her, come into her body, and spend day and night with her sharing the everyday chores, she suddenly felt a strong sense of discomfort. "What are you looking at? Come help me." Leo saw her and smiled. His smile was aged with creases gathering at the corners of his eyes. Sophie strode over, steadied him, her hand locked on his arm. After laying in bed for so many days, the once plump muscles become loose, losing the sense of male strength. Upon realizing that these were the solid arms she once leaned on, she sobbed. Leo seemed unaware of her emotional turmoil until after using the bathroom and washing his hands that he slowly said, "Sophie, you've been working hard during this period. You've been taking care of my parents when they're unwell and it's tiring enough. But I've added to your load when I should be lending you support. And there's our child, don't rush with assisting his homework. Do as much as he can, he's only in first grade. Let him play if he wants to, there's plenty of time in the future to catch up." Sophie wiped the corner of her eyes. "I don't feel it's too hard." "Are you worried about me then?" asked Leo. "Don't overthink, it's just a little cancer cell. After the surgery is over, there will be no problem." Sophie nodded and embraced Leo from behind. His broad back was like a wall to her. No matter what storm she encountered, she just needed to hide behind this wall for Leo to help her withstand everything. Yet now, she finally realized that even the most solid wall could collapse. From the moment Leo had that little piece of intestine removed, her fortress began to crumble. After settling Leo, Sophie left to visit her father on the 4th floor of this building and her mother on the 5th floor of building number 2. Sophie's father, Howard, had a stroke and was hospitalized for 3 days for infusion and clearance. He could be discharged tomorrow. Her mother Linda was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and was undergoing chemotherapy with good results, with only the last treatment to go. After making the rounds of the 3 wards, she rushed to pick up her son from school. In the evening, the 3 patients were left to the care of the nurses in the hospital. She needed to stay at home to tend to her son, cooking, bathing him, assisting his homework, often wouldn't get to bed until past 10. Even though she was exhausted, she still had trouble falling asleep. As soon as she closed her eyes, her heart seemed to fall into an abyss. Standing by the edge, peering in, all she could see was darkness, with no end in sight. The image mirrored her future life. Sophie was 35, arguably in her prime. However, her father was 70, her mother 69, her husband 50, and her son only 6. Putting these numbers in front of her, her remaining years were concerning. 3 elderly people and a child, it's weary just thinking about it. Over the last few days, she felt the fatigue deeply. Fast forward 10 years, her father would be 80, her mother 79, her husband 60, and her son 16, she would be the only able-bodied person in the family. The chaos of that life, she dared not even contemplate, it would be depressingly overwhelming. Several days later, all 3 patients were discharged from the hospital one after another. For convenience, Sophie brought her parents to live at her house. After work, she would always see her father, who had the best recovery, assisting Leo, or her thin mother making meals in the kitchen, or her unknowing son running around the house pretending to be Ultraman. One night, Sophie brought work home. While working late, Leo suddenly had stomach pain. Sophie had to stop working and followed the ambulance to the hospital with Leo. After a series of checks with nothing found and Leo's pain already eased, they took a taxi home. When they arrived home, the unusually quiet atmosphere gave Sophie a faint sense of unease. As expected, the door to the study was pushed open, and her son came out crying to apologize. Sophie rushed in and found the keyboard of the laptop placed on the desk drenched in water. This was the first time Sophie lost her temper since her family fell ill. She scolded her son fiercely, knowing well it was wrong but unable to control herself. Her 6-year-old son was scolded to the point of being unable to cry. The other 3 adults were standing by the door of the study, all hunched over to some extent, but no one spoke up to stop her. Sophie practically ruined the warmth and harmony of the house, extracting the fear and helplessness of recent times, flinging mud around, leaving a hole in everyone's hearts, and finally, she felt relieved. That night, the house was unusually quiet. The next morning, Howard and Linda announced that they wanted to go back to their own home. Guilty, Sophie asked, "You two are still unwell, how could you cope?" Howard responded, "Leo is recovering well, we were planning to move back anyway." Sophie nodded and turned to look at Leo. Under the table, Leo held Sophie's hand and said with a smile, "Tomorrow I'll reclaim the property across the street from our neighborhood and stop renting it out. The house is decently decorated, just needs some cleanup and a bit of furnishing. They can move in there. It's close to us, and it will be easier on Sophie as well. In case of any emergencies, we won't have to cross 2 districts." Sophie turned to her parents. Howard nodded, "That works." Sophie clung to Leo's hand, filled with gratitude. She wasn't so much thankful for Leo's arrangement but for his demeanor in front of her parents, an older son-in-law, who was diagnosed with early-stage colon cancer and being taken care of by aging in-laws. As the 3 elderly members of the family gradually recovered, life seemed to regain its tranquility. However, Leo could no longer return to his old self. It was as if the surgery didn't just target a piece of his intestine, but also the last vestiges of his youthful spirit. He stopped dyeing his hair, letting it turn white, and focused on comfort when dressing, no longer trying to appear young. One day, their son came home angry. "Dad picked me up today, and Jack from my class asked if he was my granddad. Jack is such an idiot." Leo chuckled, but Sophie couldn't. As she served the meal, she said to Leo, "You could spruce yourself up a bit." Leo replied, "I'm old, and no matter how much I try to disguise it, it's written all over me." Pausing, he continued, "Better to face reality." Sophie, ladling soup, paused midair and lost her appetite. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep, while Leo was in a deep slumber beside her. She got out of bed and went to the study, opened the window, grabbed a pack of cigarettes, and took a puff. The flickering light seemed to open a gate to her memories, taking her back to their earlier days. She was 20 then, a junior in college, interning at a well-known company and fell in love at first sight with her 35-year-old boss, Leo. Upon hearing Leo was single, she immediately started actively pursuing him, only to be rejected by Leo. Sophie was spoiled by her parents from an early age and was stubborn and rebellious. She liked to take on challenges. The more Leo rejected her, the more determined she became. She tried many tactics to force Leo close to her. When out for business dinners, she would call Leo claiming to be drunk and that a client was trying to take advantage of her, forcing Leo to come pick her up. When traveling, she would call Leo claiming to be sick with a high fever and no hospital nearby, forcing him to take a night flight to come to her aid. Of course, Leo always found out in the end that these were all excuses made by Sophie. She was using what little she knew from economics in her pursuit, constantly increasing Leo's sunk cost. One day, she stripped herself bare and climbed into Leo's bed. That night, Leo didn't reject her, and they became a couple. But due to his relationship with an intern which violated company policy, Leo lost his promising job. After Sophie graduated, Leo started his own business. They struggled for a few years, but life slowly improved. They planned on getting married, but both sets of parents unanimously disapproved. Howard and Linda couldn't accept their precious daughter marrying a man 15 years older than her. They were certain she was brainwashed by Leo. Leo's parents, having heard of Sophie's previous outrages, also refused to accept such an unconventional girl into their family. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, Sophie hid behind Leo. She watched him appease both sets of parents, making promises while simultaneously buying a house, furnishing it, and growing their nest egg. The tug-of-war lasted for a long time until Sophie was 25 and Leo 40. They finally tied the knot. The days that followed were smooth sailing. Sophie seamlessly transitioned from her parents' home into Leo's arms. She quit that job she only kept thanks to Leo's sacrifice and tried her hand at starting a business like Leo. But she failed miserably, losing a considerable amount of money which Leo covered. After giving up on entrepreneurship, she developed a fascination with travel, sometimes with Leo, sometimes solo, but always funded by Leo. At that time, Leo's parents' health was deteriorating, and they urged her to have a child sooner rather than later. She was reluctant, and Leo didn't pressure her. She only decided to have a child because she watched some infant care videos and thought babies seemed fun. Being a mother with such a mindset, Sophie naturally wasn't up for the task of child raising and relied on Leo instead. Leo, happy to pick up the slack, was already 44 when he became a father, considered having a child late in life. He was taking care of both the house and the outside world and was looking after his hospitalized parents. Sophie was oblivious to his situation and lacked empathy. It wasn't that she was heartless, but rather her life had always been smooth sailing. She lived in a protective bubble created by her parents and later her husband. To her, the world was a giant playground. When she thinks about the past now, it feels like a lifetime ago. Her world, once a fun fair, is now in darkness. The merry-go-round no longer sings, the train no longer rushes, the pirate ship no longer swings, and the Ferris wheel has lost its stars. By the time the adult world welcomed her, she was already in her 30s. She knew she should mature and be like every other adult around her. But since her hands had never formed calluses, it hurt a lot, and she was very tired. She had a secret she hadn't told anyone. She had been harboring the idea of a divorce for quite some time. She felt like she was going to be hit by lightning, face retribution, but still, she wanted a divorce. Because if she divorced, she wouldn't have to take care of the aging Leo. Even though this old machine was once the assembly line that created happiness for her, she knew very clearly that the root source of her current troubles wasn't her aging parents or young child. These sweet burdens are carried by everyone, and the reason she's suffering such a hard time is that she has an additional burden, an aging husband. Sophie dared not voice her thoughts. Even though she had been somewhat of a jerk all along, she still couldn't say it out loud. Once she had this idea, however, she felt a worm wriggling in her heart. She racked her brain, thinking that it's best to let things happen slowly, let their feelings cool down gradually. So she decided to apply for a transfer in her current company to work in a different city, as there seemed to be such an opportunity. One day, she shared her thoughts with Leo. Leo fell silent for a long time before finally saying, "I don't think it's a good idea for you to work in a different city." Sophie hung her head, not daring to look at Leo. She felt a little distressed, as Leo continued to analyze the pros and cons for her. Leo continued, "Your company is in the heavy industry sector. All the facilities are here, it's impossible for them to relocate. If you go to a different city and separate from the headquarters, there won't be much room for development. At most, you might earn a bit more money, but we are not in dire need of it." Sophie didn't say a word. Leo cleared his throat. "Our son is mischievous, but he's bright. I took him to an interview at the best private school. He has a chance of getting in. It's a boarding school, so your burden will be a bit lighter. Your parents are in a stable condition now. There should be no major issues in the next few years. Regular checkups should suffice." Sophie was somewhat perplexed. "Why are you saying all this?" Leo looked at her with a smile. "Sophie, over these entrepreneurial years, I have accumulated some money. Even if we stop running the business, we can still get by. But while my health still permits, I want to give it another shot. A friend has offered me an executive role at his company with good pay. I am thinking of taking up the offer, to save a bit more for you and our son. Who knows when I'll drop dead and what you two will do then?" Sophie was stunned, staring blankly at Leo. She suddenly realized, how could she possibly hide her true feelings from Leo with her shallow understanding? Leo was painstakingly trying to remove the marital shackles around her neck, guilt-free, to facilitate her desires subtly. Sophie found herself not as easygoing as she imagined. She even felt pain. She asked her parents, "I feel like I can't handle life in the future. I'm only 35, yet Leo is already 50. I want to divorce Leo. Am I a very despicable person?" Howard sighed and asked, "After the divorce, what then? How do you plan to live?" Sophie choked up, slowly picturing her future: raise the kids, take care of you guys. Then, maybe possibly remarry? "I don't know." Howard asked, "Remarry, planning on finding what kind of person?" Sophie replied, "I might find someone similar to myself, perhaps." Howard asked again, "Finding someone similar to yourself, would life become easier?" Sophie didn't have an answer, she didn't know. Howard continued to say, "Daughter, haven't you figured it out until now? Your problem is not that your husband is old, but you have no sense of responsibility. Whether a man or woman, if they have no sense of responsibility, they have no backbone and flesh, and can't handle even the slightest hardship. Marriage has no shortcuts. If you marry high, you must swallow the needle. If you marry low, you must be bloodsucked. If you find an equal, you need to share in both prosperity and adversity. An young man requires you to mother him, and an old man needs you to take care of him when he ages. In the beginning, we didn't agree about your marriage with Leo. You seemed like you wouldn't survive without him. Why did you choose a man who is so much older than you? Because he treated you like a daughter and could solve all your problems with his immense energy. But everyone has to bear a certain responsibility in a marriage, and you're no exception. Taking care of his later years is your responsibility. If you can't do it, even if you found a younger man, you wouldn't still have a happy life because a young partner will have other problems for you to solve. Right now, you're just paying off the carefree time you've been borrowing these years. Weeping into her hands, Sophie realized she was really too weak and selfish. She was so weak that for the sake of bodily comfort, she was willing to give up a man who truly loved her. Her father was right. Whether she had a young husband or an older husband, there would come a day when she had to clean up after him, tolerate his aging wrinkles. Likewise, her husband too had to face the same situation. These are things that should have been considered during the youthful courting phase. Love is a scenery, and getting by daily is the scene killer. Divorce, leaving none can evade. If she wanted to live alone to avoid trouble, she should not have occupied Leo's healthy life before the age of 50 and enjoyed everything he brought. Sophie thought about it, left her parents' home, and hurried home. Only a street separated the two houses, but this was the first time she felt the traffic light at the intersection was so long. She had to go home and hug Leo, stop him from packing, and tell him not to go anywhere. Love is not a fragile flower that can only grow in prosperity. Love is a tree, which can endure the changing seasons and wind and rain, just like a marriage vow. In poverty or wealth, in sickness and in health, in youth and old age, it will never give up.